Colin Gillespie gets a bad break. Plus, do the Nuggets look like in 2023? And who could be moved to the deadline this year for the Denver Nuggets? All this and more on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where you can join the show and join folks like Marcus and Miroslav and Clay, who are all in here on a Monday morning joining us on the show live. Appreciate you guys being with us on a Monday. On today's show, we'll talk about Collin Gillespie's injury. We'll talk about where the situation is going to be in 2023. We're going to be talking about, and we'll take a look ahead at the trade deadline this season and look at players that might be moved at the deadline if necessary for your Denver Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, joined by my colleague Adam Mares. You can find him on Twitter at Adam_Mares. Adam, how was the weekend?
Weekend is good. You can't tell from the looks of this, but I'm redoing my office. I'm very excited about it. There's like little things people can't tell yet, but I'm very excited about where it's going.
I'm going to be redoing my office, and I'm actually going to make sure that I have a piece of Denver Nuggets art in the background for this show, and then I'll just swap it out when I do other shows. But I'm going to do that.
Yeah, throw the fans a bone, man. Come on, don't do that thing. You got to throw them a bone. Who are you going to put up? Who would you do? If you could put up one Nuggets themed item behind you for your show,
I would get like some sort of poster of Alex English. That's what I would do.
That's a good one. All right, good call. I thought you were going to say like Darrell Arthur or something.
Oh, I would absolutely do. I would 100% have art of Darrell, of DA in the background.
I don't know if there is a Darrell Arthur poster out there. I don't know if those exist.
Can someone do that, please? All right. So, let's go ahead and start here. And unfortunate news over the weekend, the Nuggets announced that Collin Gillespie, two-way contract guard for your Denver Nuggets, suffered a broken leg. That's a real bummer for Collin. That is absolutely terrible for him to have worked so hard, really was picked up on draft night as kind of an immediate pickup. Like, they were very interested in him, had a pretty good summer league, and was set to play, I think, a significant role on next year's team in terms of how the course of the season typically goes. I expected to see him some, and so to see this it's my first thought is just like it's a bummer for Collin. Like, that's a horrible way for your professional basketball career to start. You finally get this deal, and now you're immediately on the shelf. It is guaranteed for a certain amount of money. What was your reaction? You texted me and had a little bit of with this injury right off the bat, not only from an actual tactical basketball perspective, but from an omen standpoint.
The omen part's kind of a joke. I don't think. I mean, it's a bummer that you're already losing players 2 months before training camp. So I mean, I don't think that's a bad omen. It's just literally bad. It's your one player fewer than you were, before camp even begins. I think you can go back to tell this story though, Matt. You can go back even further. There's a guy that won a national championship. There's a guy that won the Big East tournament player, the MVP of the Big East tournament. Bob Cousy, best point guard in college. This is a guy that did everything, right? Like, some guys don't get drafted for various reasons. Did you freeze on me, Matt?
No, man.
Oh, no, you're just not. Oh, you pulled a Gary Trent. He's just not moving. Active listening, Matt. Come on, active listening. No, this is a guy that did everything. I mean, like, the reason he didn't get drafted higher are largely reasons beyond his control. Like, well, we don't know what his upside is the athleticism, this or that. But he checked all the boxes. Then he goes into summer league and has a very good summer league. This is a guy that was grinding to get a chance, and that chance is not completely taken away from him. But if Vegas set odds on will Collin Gillespie be an NBA player ever, his odds just had a collapse.
Yeah.
They just, by all accounts, 5 to 6 month recovery time. That puts you in January or February. Effectively, he's going to miss this season. You only get one season. It reminds me of Greg Whittington. Often it's like, hey, I don't know what this guy is. We're taking a flyer. Let's see what it is. You miss your shot. You just don't get like we can't bring you back another year to give, we just used a year on you. So to me, I first and foremost, this is just sucks for Colin because it's a guy who it's very rare that you can literally see something be taken from you. And that's the situation that he finds himself in.
Yeah. From Gillespie's standpoint, like it sucks. It's horrible. Like one, it's pain. I always think, I always want to bring this up whenever injuries. I do this whenever I write news on stuff. Like first and foremost, think about the pain the individual goes through. Like if you've broken a bone, it hurts badly.
Oh, a leg too. I have never broken a leg, but I can only imagine.
And then there's the recovery time, and then there's the rehab, and the rehab is always brutal, and you have to do. It sucks. It's terrible from a team standpoint. I think you are more concerned about the impact than I am, which is not to say that either of us are deeply concerned, and neither to say that it's not nothing. I just tend to look at it and go, look, he's a two-way player. They have veterans ahead of him. It's possible, like it's likely that there's going to be individual games where the guards are going to need, some reinforcements. It's possible that we have a situation last year where there's what I would describe as like a cluster injury where all the guards are out and you're going to be like, man, they could really use Collin Gillespie. Right. If that's the case,
Colin
though,
would have played last year under similar circumstances.
Right.
Like he would have gotten it in.
My thing would probably be that if you're in a point where you're like, man, they could really use Collin Gillespie, the train has already left the tracks. Like you are already.
I don't know if that's fully fair. Here's a scenario where it happened. By the way, every time we do this, Matt, we always have the same take. We just phrase it differently. So like we might be on the same page here.
Sure.
Here's a scenario where this injury can meaningfully impact the Nuggets. First week of the season, or maybe it's preseason, and Bones Hyland rolls an ankle. Jamal Murray's already on a minutes restriction. He's already not playing back-to-backs, and all of a sudden Bones is out 2 weeks. Just not a major injury, but we'll say he's going to miss 8 games. All right, so we know Jamal's on a minutes restriction, and we also know that he is, not playing back-to-backs. We missed 1, maybe 2 games in that first 8, and we don't want to play him too much. So now all of a sudden Ish Smith is playing 30 minutes a night, 30, 31, 32 minutes a night. Okay. Now so that's a scenario where, and then a back-to-back, who's the backup point guard? Ish Smith starts, and Bruce Brown is your backup point guard. Does that cost you 1 game? Does it cost you 2? Does it cost you 0? Maybe, and at the end of the year, does that matter? Does that meaningfully matter? Maybe a Bones injury is a little bit further. I mean, he's a skinny guy playing a lot of minutes. Maybe he ends up having to miss 3-4 weeks. Now all of a sudden you're talking about, hey, is this meaningfully lowering our win total by 3, 4, 5 games? And if so, that impacts your season. You go from a 2 seed or a 1 seed all down to a 4 or 5 seed. So that's why I say that I think this injury matters a little bit, specifically because the Nuggets have one guy who's a guaranteed minutes restriction guy in Jamal Murray, and another guy in Bones Hyland who last year suffered a couple different injuries throughout the course of a season, and he's going to be playing more minutes. And then lastly, and why I think it's more important, because those are okay, maybe it costs you a game here or there. Most likely scenario is it costs you 0 to 1 games. But what's more important is two-way guys run the gamut from Torrey Craig and Monte Morris, where you look at them and you're like, man, these guys have a real chance. You feel optimistic about them. And then they have ultimately become guys that it's like, hey, they spent 1 year in the G League and then became a piece of the puzzle. And then you have the other side, like Devon Purcell and Marcus Howard, who they just didn't matter. They were just prospects. If I were betting, I would bet that Collin Gillespie on that scale, the likelihood is significantly closer to a Monte or a Torrey Craig. What I saw in Summer League and everything we know about him, it reminds me so much of Monte. Was he the leader in assist to turnover ratio? Yes. Was he good at almost everything it requires to be a point guard? Yes. Why didn't he make it? We don't know if his upside's there. We don't know if the physicality is there. We saw in Summer League that he was able to handle at least that level of physicality and had no drop-off. To me, I look at him and I go, I think he's a guy that spent this year in the G League and next year is the third-string point guard, which is a meaningful role, by the way. A guy that you can add on on your roster for a 2-3 year minimum, and he's reliable enough to be on your roster and maybe more than that. I think he was significantly closer to that, and it just sucks because now I look at it and I go, I don't know. You miss a whole year. I just don't know what your chances are, especially on Denver.
Yeah, I think everyone around the Nuggets, except me, saw the Monte Morris comparison, was like, hey, this guy looks a lot like Monte. I think he could be really good. I didn't necessarily see it, which is okay. That just might be a problem with me. Do we agree that probably I don't know if they're going to do this because they tend to let the chips fall where they may in regards to injury situation. Like we've seen that from, and now this is different for an office. We'll see what approach they take. But like under Conley, it was definitely, there were situations where you're like, you're really thin here. If you have an injury, and they're like, yeah, that happens, right? And then it would happen, and you're like, well, here we are. I'm of the opinion they should, as much as it sucks for Colin, and I hope he gets another chance, the best thing for the team is probably to waive him and bring in another two-way. Like, I just think that's probably, like, the best. I think they are going to need another guard. I just think they're going to need one.
Strong agree, and it really does suck for Colin. I don't know how much the money part of that sucks because I just don't know the scenario, with him there. The rehab part of it probably sucks. If Colin is a part of the Nuggets, he gets to rehab with the Denver Nuggets training staff, which I imagine is better than just, wherever else he's going to be able to go. But yeah, I'm with you. What is the point? If you were going to bring him back, you could still add him middle of the year. You could do something there, but to me, I don't know what value he would bring to the Nuggets this year, and next year you would have to re-sign him anyway. So I'm with you. I don't know what Denver's going to do on this front, but in a certain way, in a harsh way, he does become something of dead weight, just in terms of he's not going to provide you anything this year, and he's not on your team next year.
And that's, again, you hate talking about when it comes to guys' injuries. Like, it just feels gross, but it's part of it when you're especially. Yeah, it's tough when you're trying to build.
I'm really high on him.
Build a championship. It's tough when you're trying to build a championship team and the type of margins that you're having to work within the frame of. But best of hope for him to recover. If the Nuggets don't waive him, we'll see if he can make it back on the roster this year. We'll see what happens. We'll follow the situation obviously closely here on Locked On Nuggets. We'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about where do we think things are going to be in a year. Adam had the idea of talking about what the Nuggets situation is going to look like in 2023. Let's do that when we come back on Locked On Nuggets. But first, it's that time, folks. That's right. It's time. It's Built Bar time. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you're depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Delicious, indulgent cookie dough. Covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite, the cookie dough chunk puffs. They've got a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. All the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. The chunks are just about the right size, like the texture on these things. That's usually what bothers me about cookie dough pieces and that kind of stuff in ice cream or whatever. And the chunks in these puffs are the appropriate texture. The texture on these things is absolutely phenomenal with the puffs. Run to Built.com and snag a box for you and your family. It'll be the perfect treat. Or you can find a really good hiding place and just hoard them for yourself. Like all Built Bars, the new cookie dough chunk puff is covered in 100% real chocolate. That means they're healthy and tasty, and they're made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. You're going to love the new cookie dough chunk puff, whether you need a snack for a fast workout, a late night treat, or just need to grab a quick bite. Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste better than a candy bar. Ditch the calories, fat, and sugar, and grab yourself a Built Bar. Go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, for 15% off at Built.com. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets, thanks for joining us, making this part of your day. If you're joining us on the YouTube channel, which is where you can find us and join the live chat, you got the Oso Blanco in here. Zamora is hanging out as always. Hurricane, always making me a little uncomfortable. David in here. Lycos is asking if I'm coming to Serbia. No, unfortunately, I will not be joining the DNVR crew in Serbia, but you should definitely check out DNVR and all their news about their Serbia trip. Adam? So you had this idea. You want to talk about 2023. Set me up with what you want to talk about here, and we can dive into where the Denver Nuggets are going to be at in 2023.
So the impetus for this is whenever people talk about the Nuggets, and most of this is right, by the way, they're like, okay, the team locked up a multi-year window. Like all the core pieces are here for an extended period of time. But that's mostly true, but not wholly true. So I wanted to look at, should the Nuggets not win it this year? They just have, let's say a par season for them. Vegas has par, by the way, as them as a first round out. I mean, right now I think they have the 5th best title odds in the Western Conference. So a first round out or second round out, either way, they have that show some promise. Like, okay, they're on the upswing. But what are the decision points the Nuggets would have to make at that point? And where will they be? The core pieces are locked up. Jokic, Murray, Porter, Gordon, all here for 3 more years at a minimum, with no player option there. Like those are 3 guys that you can say we roll into the next summer, no problem. KCP would then have 1 year plus a player option on. So again, you could just roll in to the season with him, although he would effectively be on an expiring contract. Your rookies, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Ishmael Kamagate, all still available to you. The guys that you're going to have questions on are going to be Bruce Brown, who will be a free agent. He actually has a player option for $6.8 million. My guess is that he will probably have earned more than that by then and will opt out. That just whenever you sign a 1+1, you feel like that's the +1 is usually like injury protection. That's usually how I look at it. Zeke Naji, it'll be time to start looking at him. Is he a guy that you're going to try to extend, make it to keep there? Oh, by the way, Bones Hyland also locked up. Davon Reed will be entering the last year. Jeff Green will be gone. Ish Smith, DeAndre Jordan, all of those guys, their contract will be up. So those are the moves. What stands out to you in terms of, okay, next summer, Denver's going to have to be focused on?
I'm trying to figure out if I think that the roster will be intact next year. I'm trying to think about like what the odds I think of that happening, because I try and like.
Well, we'll do that next segment. Players
right. So if we do you want to assume?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's assume that it's intact.
Somebody said like Open Blanco said so no hard decisions, and I just so strongly agree with that. You have to remember, and this is one of the things that I don't think people understand, and why a part of why I thought Colin Gillespie is important. The Nuggets aren't going to have money. They're going to have to be like creative in how they add these players. You only have so many exceptions available to you. So part of this is you can't add backup small forwards for more than just minimums and exceptions.
Right. So they'll have the taxpayer MLE, and what'll be tough there, I think, is Bruce Brown. Right. Yeah. I think that's going to be like a really tough one to get squared away, because you would assume that Bruce is going to opt out. Right, he has a good season and he opts out and he uses his player option, and there's a free agency market. He definitely wanted to come here. He definitely got the reasons why it was good for him to come here, but in part, like, you come here because you're like, I'm going to have a great season next to Jokic, and it's going to increase my value, right? Versus coming off of the Nets disaster. Because I was honestly, it's shocking the deal that they got him for. Right, it's like $6.5 million for Bruce Brown is an absolute steal in my opinion, based off of market value. So if you look at it from that lens, right, to me, Bruce Brown is like the biggest question mark next season, because that's the most important role.
Right.
One of the reasons we like the Bruce Brown signing so much is that because he can fill 2, 3, 4, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4. If we get into a really bad
part
situation.
Part of why getting a guy in early, though, I do think it'll be easier for them to work out a deal with him. Going into next year, it just might cost. It'll still cost more. Like it'll be more expensive. But again, not our problem. That's what you do when you have a chance.
Yeah, and like, look, the ownership has maintained that they'll pay, they'll pay to compete for a championship. So that's why I think so much of this is the projection of this with where we think now, because I think the front office wants to operate on windows and 5-year runs and trying to keep a sustainable approach, having a shot every single season. We see kind of this year, right, where so much of how a season goes dictates the feeling of whether or not a guy should be retained or whether you should shake it up or whatever. And that's why I have a really hard time with these kind of exercises, because it's like, well, these guys should be around next season. And you're like, well, Aaron Gordon's locked up. And I'm like, what if they get into the playoffs and there's like there's a matchup or a situation that we just weren't prepared for, and all these types of changes. I do agree with you that getting the guy is always the hardest thing. That's always the hardest thing, or at least that's what GMs say. Like getting the guy is always that's the hard part. They got the guy, and they got the guy and the second guy and the third guy and the fourth guy. But then the problem becomes, as you mentioned, like trying to work within those margins.
Right.
It does get very difficult, not only from the perspective, because this is where I think a lot of the discourse goes wrong. And it's not just fans, it's media too, is the idea that all situations have equal opportunity based off of the money or competitive nature. And that's simply not it. You can have a guy that you're like, look, you're getting offers in this range. We're offering you slightly more. We got we're willing to give you out of the taxpayer MLE is more than what you're getting on the market. We have a role for you. Everything's perfect. And the guy's just like, I don't want to live in Denver. That's it. Don't want, or I don't like X guy that you're playing with. Like whatever it is, or agent is like, I don't deal with that team, or I'm worried about this guy. Whatever it is, like there's all these things that go on. The undercurrent of the NBA is so strong, and it operates completely out of sight. Right. And those things I think wind up dictating a lot of why the margins are so difficult for a team in Denver's spot, where you have money locked up and you're trying to navigate. You're effectively trying to win the margins, which is so difficult.
Well, so here's where Denver will be at. If you think about their starting five will be intact. I feel pretty confident about that. Again, unless they make trades, but their starting five, you bring them all back. So you're really looking at your bench will be Bones Hyland and Bruce Brown, should you be able to retain Bruce Brown. So Bones Hyland for sure, Bruce Brown maybe, if you're able to work out a deal that keeps him here. Jeff Green, free agent, so you would have to bring him back. Zeke Naji, you'll be at the point where you need to make a decision on him. And then DeAndre Jordan will be gone. So then you'll be out. So really your bench right now would just be Bones Hyland and Bruce Brown, and then Bruce Brown's a maybe. You're basically going to have to add 3 key rotation pieces. Now that might be Christian, but this is the reason I bring it up is this is why Zeke Naji is so important. He needs to play well enough that he is either part of the long-term plan or he outperforms that and you have to trade him. But some team is like, hey, that's a good player that we can lock up for 4 or 5 years. So we'll trade for him at the deadline or something like that. Like if there is a scenario here, I know you're not a believer in it, although I think there's a real possibility that Zeke Naji plays so well that the Nuggets look at it and go, we can't afford this guy. Like this guy's too good. He's too valuable at what it is. And we're going to ride him. We're going to use him until we can no longer afford him. So they need Zeke Naji to either hit that sweet spot of being just perfect for this team or to outperform it. And then Christian Brown, we always talk about it about like this year, if you're relying on him, what have you, he still needs to get to the point where next year you can rely on him. That next year when you look at your bench, you go, you know what we have? We have Bones, Brown, and Brown. We have 3 pieces on there that we love. They fit together. This is it. That's who we are. And then maybe Zeke Naji is your 4th. And now you can go into next summer saying, you know what? We just need a center. Kind of what we needed this year. We just need a center, or we just need this piece. Maybe it's Kamagate. He grows into that role. I guess that would be the perfect scenario. Christian Brown grows into a guy that you just pencil in. We can trust him for 20 minutes a night or more. Zeke Naji, pencil him in 20 minutes a night or more. He fits perfectly, and we got to extend him. And then Kamagate comes over, and you're like, boom, that's our backup center. Now you have your 10-man rotation, and everything's good. The likelihood of all of those things hitting is pretty low, though.
Let's take a break. We'll come back, and we'll talk about the deadline, because Adam mentioned a lot there with Zeke, and I think we're going to talk about Zeke a lot in the next segment for a number of reasons. So we'll talk about Zeke as well as like whatever other players we think might be involved at the trade deadline for the 2022-23 Nuggets. We'll do that when we come back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets, thanks for joining us, making it your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms like YouTube. We got so many folks in the conversation right now. So many folks weighing in and giving their thoughts on the future of the Denver Nuggets. So as part of that, we talked about the decision that will come with Zeke Naji next season, where he'll still be on the roster, which is that Zeke has this season. He has a club option for next season, which will presumably be is that already been executed? I would assume if it hasn't been, it'll be executed at some point. And then in 2024-25, he would be a restricted free agent coming off of his rookie season. And to me, if we're going to talk about the NBA deadline and the possibility of movement, I think the conversation begins and ends with Zeke Naji, because as you mentioned in the previous segment, I think there is a real possibility that Zeke plays so well. He comes out and he's bombing 40% from 3 and he's a plus defender. And you're just like, look, there's no way we can't give this guy, a 4-year 40 or a 4-year, 60 deal. There's just no way to make that financially feasible with where the luxury tax is at for this team. Well, let me read. Yeah,
you're right. They could do it if they wanted to. Hey, how much would that shock you if the Cronkies next year pull a Lacob and it's just like, wow, look at this, $80-90 million tax payment?
I would be stunned. I would have to do an entire segment that's just me like sitting in stunned silence for how much that would surprise me.
We'll see. I'm not counting on it either, but we'll see.
I think the most likely scenario, honestly, is that Zeke doesn't have a bad season, but instead Zeke has like one of those seasons where you're like, you could see it, like, look at the numbers, but then you're also like, yeah, but also you're in this middle place where you're like, he's been good, but he hasn't been awesome. And you're having to make this decision, and that to me is where he's most likely traded. Because you could probably do a sign and trade deal if he hits restricted free agency. Like that, if he's so good, you probably just play it out and are like, look, if the core four is still there and we haven't moved one of those guys, and we can't afford to keep Zeke Nnaji, we'll let him hit restricted free agency and try and hit a sign and trade. Because teams are usually pretty amenable to that. Like
you don't get that much out of it, but you might end up getting a little pick, a second pick or something like that, or
right.
Which is better than nothing. I'm with you, by the way. This idea of losing a player for nothing, that's more important. The lesser the player is on your roster, the less important that is. It might actually be, to your point, better to use Zeke Nnaji on a qualifying offer 4th year than it is to like trade him early. Like it might just be like, hey, we're going to lose this guy for virtually nothing, but it's worth it to have him for 1 extra year.
Who else do we think on the roster might be involved at the deadline?
I think all of the young play. I mean, you just have to look at it and think that Denver is making a bet on their starting 5, and if those guys don't fit together, we're talking about more substantial problems. Like the reason you would trade Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter, you would trade if somebody I think was calling you and had a more certain thing. I just don't think that's going to happen. And then Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. First of all, difficult to trade him before, X date. I don't know if it's January 15th this year or what it is, but it's difficult to trade him anyway. And so I don't expect any of those 5 guys to really be looked at as trade options. You start to go to the young players. I mean, you mentioned Zeke Nnaji, but now you have a Christian Brown. You have a Peyton Watson. I mean, the scenario would be Peyton Watson's crushing it in the G League at that point, but not crushing it so much that you feel you could use him, but like if somebody else wants him. Christian Brown, maybe he looks like a really good prospect and you can just get a more ready now piece. That would be the scenario that you would go for a player like that. I don't see really that's it, I guess. Then you're just talking about Bones Hyland to me as the piece that is the most likely to be a valuable trade asset. I think right now Bones has this value as this upside play because of how he performed last year. And there's a lot of numbers that would tell you, hey, this is a really good risk to take if you're another GM. This is a really good risk to take because this guy might end up being like a lottery pick. If he has a great year this year, Denver could find themselves in that unenviable position where it's like, we have a blue chip 21-year-old player that's very valuable to us. But is he more valuable now to a team that is very desperate to move on from a win-now player that's like an all-star caliber piece, something of that nature? And then you're talking about, I mean, there's a scenario where Bones Hyland is like a most improved player type candidate, but you can actually get a current all-star ready right now that might be a starter and completely change your title window. That's one scenario I kind of foresee.
Zamora says, am I the only one who wants Zeke to be able to show enough where AG becomes available? Zeke is a perfect fit with Jokic.
I would love it because that means that Zeke is awesome. Like AG's a really, really good player. So I'm with you that Zeke could be, like, in theory, the best version, the 100th percentile outcome of him is Aaron Gordon with a jump shot. Like there's something there that's it. But the more likely outcome, like the bigger slices of the pie, is that he has certain aspects of AG's game, but not all of them. And you kind of need all of the aspects of the player when they're in that important of a role.
I would put like 75 to 80% chance that Zeke is never as good as AJ. That's just my personal. And that's a lot.
Go higher than that. Like Aaron Gordon's a really good player.
Yeah.
Aaron Gordon's a really good player. But I mean, his thing was, I do think it's within the realm of possibility, though. It's
within the realm. Yeah, it's within the realm of possibility for sure. But like I said, I can't see that really happening. It's interesting though because you go towards the young guys, and I go the other way where I go like if you're talking about other guys that might be moved at the deadline, I look at Jeff Green.
Yeah, Jeff Green's a good one. 1 year left.
And even though it would be really difficult, Bruce Brown. So I think the Bruce Brown situation this is what's really interesting. If Bruce kills it, like if it's just like he has a monster season, we're getting an echo for some reason. If he just kills it, and it's like such a great fit, do you trade him? Because you can't. You're like he's gonna opt out, and we're not gonna be able to afford him. Right. So you get something back, or do you just like? I would say that what you have to do with the title window, like this is where the title window matters, because with the title window, you essentially have to be like, look, if we lose him in free agency, we lose him in free agency. But this gives us we're not going to get better value right now.
Can you do that with him? Can you do that with Bruce Brown?
Yeah.
I guess you signed him, so I guess you can say, hey, we'll have to sign a replacement there. Here's what's funny. some players are this way and some players are not. I think Bruce Brown is one of the players that if he crushed it in Denver, especially in a way that was an outlier for him, I kind of think that he would be discounted as, yeah, but that's with Jokic. That's with the Nuggets. They're so unique. Is he really going to fit with, Vucevic, the way that he fits with Jokic? Like, so I wonder if it would be really hard for him to crush it in a way that every team would be like, oh, that fits into our system as well.
Yeah. Especially given what his market was, because I'm still shocked that they were able to get him, period. But not only to get him, but to get him for the price. So,
right.
Maybe the market is just lower on him than we are. Maybe he's just a Twitter darling. That happens sometimes, time and again. Jeff Green
it happens more often when players are weird, by the way, and he's weird. He's unique. So.
Yeah. If Zeke actually has a really great season, I think I think that increases the chances of Jeff Green getting moved, right? Because if you're like, no, we can viably play Zeke at 4 and like dabble in some 4-5 stuff if he has a really good season.
There's redundancy for sure at that role, like guys that aren't really 5s, that more are best at power forward. There's a redundancy of players on Denver's roster that are best at power forward. Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter, Zeke Naji, Jeff Green, Vlatko Čančar, maybe even Bruce Brown. It's like there's a lot of players that can play that, so he does seem that way. But here's the thing we never think of, Matt, but every single time I end up talking to somebody in Denver's front office, it's like it's front of their mind and it's back of ours. You trade Jeff, you don't have that many veterans. I know at this point Jokic is a veteran of this or that, but you just don't have that many guys that are like, hey, I've been through all of this or what have you. All of a sudden it's DeAndre Jordan and Ish Smith, and then a bunch of guys that are 27 and below. Jeff Green kind of fills that important role there. So if you could trade him if you feel that you no longer need that to the degree you have in the past, but I don't expect Denver would do that.
Yeah, that stuff is always, like you mentioned, it's always at the front, and it's hard to really encapsulate that, especially I will say it's really difficult when we're not in the locker rooms. God, I want to get back in the locker room. I just want to get back in the locker room. Before we get out of here, by the way, congrats to Bones Hyland on scoring 62 out of his team's 79 points in Baltimore's Brunson League last night. This was for a tweet from the Brunson League. Harrison Wynn was on this over at DNVR. He could have gone for 63 with the last shot, but they notified him that the current record holder passed away a few years ago, and Busy Bones immediately decided against taking the last shot. So,
really cool story. But can I tell you something? Because it's Pro-Am, like the dumbest thing you can do is overanalyze this. But it's worth noting that this is a very famous league. The Brunson League, like the Drew League is the most popular one. Brunson League's up there with like the Seattle Pro-Am and all these other ones. Like it's not just a bunch of guys playing pickup at Lifetime. This is like a league that, goes back. The fact that he scored or had a chance to score the most points ever in a game, slightly meaningful. Not super meaningful, but just slightly tells you like, Bones, man, he's a hell of a one-on-one player. He's a hell of a one-on-one player. And his numbers over the last, I can't remember, it was a substantial part of the season. It was like 28 games. He was averaging over 13 points per game on insane splits, like 40% from the three-point line on 6 attempts a game. Like, there's reason for optimism about this guy being on this very steep growth chart as we speak, that this is a guy that, like, I know everybody's high on him in Denver, but he was better in the second half of the year than he was on the first half of the year, and he's only 21. Like, I'm excited for Bones. I'm very excited for the upcoming Bones season.
Yeah, for sure.
What are the chances, actually, real quick, maybe we should do this on another show, but just real quick, I'm curious your initial reaction. What are the chances Bones Hyland is a top 5 Nugget next year?
Wow.
That means he would have to surpass one of the starters and Bruce Brown. And all the other guys, of course, but...
Pretty good.
I think there's a real chance. I don't know if I'm picking it because there's players that are just going to be a little more important. Like, we keep talking about Bruce Brown being a closer, but maybe Bones Hyland is a closer because he's that good.
I think it's like an interesting question of, if you look back, let's go back to the Clippers teams in the mid 2010s, and like, do you think Jamal Crawford was more important than like DeAndre Jordan was legit good then, right? But if it was like CP3 and Redick and Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, those 4,
yeah,
you probably go to like Jamal Crawford as like your 5th best guy, right?
Here's the thing though about Jamal Crawford that's different from Bones. Jamal, obviously, like, I'm not saying Bones is the level of scorer and shot creator that he is, because Jamal Crawford was elite at that. He was one of the best. Jamal Crawford was more of a true 6th man, though. He was a bucket. That was his first, second, and third role. And he could pass. He could do this other stuff. But he was mostly a bucket. I think Bones Hyland is a little bit more of a point guard. And that's what makes him – he's not as pigeonholed into a singular role like Jamal Crawford was, even though Jamal Crawford was phenomenal, one of the best all time at that specific role.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It's definitely one that we should talk about. Maybe we'll do that later this week on another edition of Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Make sure to follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Nuggets to get updates on when we go live, as well as check us out. We are in the official offseason, but we're still planning on doing, like, we'll have at least 3 shows a week, if not more, during the offseason, so make sure to keep tuned on that. I want to let you know some things coming up. Next week, I put this out on Twitter, I think the NBA schedule probably gets released next week. It's been released August 12th in the last couple of years pre-pandemic, and we're back on a normal schedule. So I'm expecting the schedule next week. If you guys have ideas that you want us to talk about on the show, hit us up on Twitter. And we always
please.
We're always looking for ideas for you guys because we're lazy. No, I'm just kidding. But we do like to hear what you guys want us to talk about. Other than that, have yourselves a great week. We'll talk to you guys again next time on Locked On Nuggets.